just want to say a few words in English. I was basically saying that this is an extraordinary chance for us to think about ourselves while we listen to a very specific study case, which is the former Yugoslavia idea of what modernity was, and that is the year that we will engage in the discussion in as much as we have a pending issue. Thank you for coming, thank you for participating, and I just hope that we can continue this discussion beyond these 2 days. Gracias.
So, thanks a lot for coming, and thanks especially to the Tàpies Foundation for this invitation and for supporting this Performing the Museum project. It's been a project, a long project, where we've been involved for over 1 year and a half. It's been an experimental project in its development. That is, in this seminar, we can say this seminar was not something which was foreseen in advance. This is the fruit of research and the expansion of collaboration networks, which has been developed progressively, and this has been done with several trips, several exchanges where we've met several artists and local interpreters who have helped us. For instance, we've got several people here today who have helped us to establish this relationship. In the last month of October, we had a little exhibition at the archive of the museum where we invited several artists in Barcelona and several educators to make small interventions at the museum. And now we are going to observe the research which was done in Eastern Europe, in the ex-Yugoslavia, in the Balkan zone. Of course, there are many cliches associated to this geographical area, and we realize that there are several characteristics, and through these characteristics that we observed, we've tried to structure a working process, something we realized, and we were really surprised about it, especially because of this mirroring effect with the Catalan and Spanish situation. Under the dictatorship of Tito, over the first years of socialism, over the 50s, there are several museums which appear and which are called contemporary and modern museums. We've got, first of all, the Zagreb Gallery in 54, we've got the Koroška Gallery at Slovak Gradec, we've got the Contemporary Museum of Belgrade, we also have the Vojvodina Museum, that is some regional museums, some national museums, which under the dictatorship, and this is what really struck us, it was almost something unthinkable here under the Franquist regime to have art policies, and contemporary art policies for the people was something which was really surprising, and we could easily exercise it. At first sight, of course, it looks wonderful, even though, of course, the situation is very complex. So that was the starting point for our research. We started to research about the 50s and the 60s, and we realized that it wasn't only museums, but there were several initiatives for promoting avant-garde modern art in the Yugoslavian context, and here there are several terms which appear and which we'll discuss afterwards. For instance, the socialist modernity concepts which were especially problematic in their context, or for instance the socialist aestheticization, another concept which is considered to be highly problematic. And of course we can keep problematizing these concepts. There is always this array of concepts which can disturb us sometimes, and this concept we've articulated of abstract socialism, of course, is also problematic. This concept for us is ironic. It is an irony between what it could be the Russian socialist realism, what we could find in the Soviet bloc, and on the other hand the abstract expressionism of the United States. So here as a third option we would have the abstract socialism, which could be like a third option which Yugoslavia was also looking for over those years. Another source of discussion in our trips with Nuria Sule to ex-Yugoslavia was this Boris Groy's book about Stalin, where he considered the impossibility of the coexistence of an avant-garde art with a socialist dictatorship. This is what had happened in the Soviet Union, where Stalin somehow promotes the socialist realism, and somehow Boris Groys considers this modern avant-garde accomplishment. This could be like a transfer of Malevich to the area of politics. This is what doesn't allow Stalin to keep on promoting cultural policies which will still promote avant-garde art. For sure, this is not the case in Yugoslavia. Tito is not Stalin, but the art is probably good and corresponding either one to the same ambition, to the same totalitarian artistic ambition as Malevich's. We find, different groups of artists, where we find artists like Ivan Pitzel, who was the one who made this wonderful fish from Salon 54, another great example of abstract art in the context of Croatia in this case. And precisely, we have used it for our meeting. And when we find like a case like the Exit 51, they are inheriting, they are successors of constructivism, which was created by Bauhaus, Malevich, and so on. And we find a very similar ideology in the beginning of the 50s, but somehow it doesn't work, as well as an avant-garde. It's more like something which could be at the back. One of the things we will be discussing would be a pedagogic exhibition about abstract art, which took place in Yugoslavia those years, which aimed to educate the people about the knowledge of abstract art, and it wasn't done by Exact 51, but by its members after the group disappeared. There is all this arrogance of the avant-garde of the first years is decreased in these kind of proposals. The text of Exact 51, the manifesto they had, the manifesto they developed, they respond more to the criticism. They are more pedagogical than taking a strong political stance as the first avant-garde did. For instance, they say sentences such as, "Those who express their rage against the introduction of elements which they've assessed as nonsense or unacceptable, our question to them is the endurance of these art expression shouldn't lead us to examine these art forms." Somehow they are being more pedagogical, they are educating by their manifesto that they put at the entrance of an art show that it was in Belgrade, and it was more about educating than about making blunt art statements. And they could also be thinking about taking positions related to this abstract socialism when they wonder this our question towards this non-socialist painting is, or do they have the formula for the socialist painting? Is there a style we could really associate with socialism? Indeed, the activity of Exact, well, we'll be talking about it a bit later on. Well, above all, it was about painting, but it was a movement, or it was a group which was closely linked to the production of exhibitions in international fairs Yugoslavia participated in over those years, like the DEC exhibition some years afterwards. So we find also a close link with the government agenda, which is also another important aspect to take into account when you try to explain, this renaissance of abstraction, this promotion of abstraction in the 50s in ex-Yugoslavia. We find mainly two different explanations. One would be that the realist socialism, didn't have much of an impact in Yugoslavia. Somehow there could be like a transfer from the constructivism of the 20s, which had a big influence in Yugoslavia. It could reappear immediately in the 50s, and in between there could be the partisan art of the Second World War, and then there could be a second interpretation which could talk about the government hidden moves, which which had to do with the policies of Tito and of the present government, which tried to take a distance from the Soviet bloc. That is, this political distance of that time could also be associated to a different style, the quest for a different art. This strange practice in Yugoslavia also resonates with abstract socialism. It's not a socialist abstraction, but it's also a socialist abstraction at a political level. When we were doing research, we found out that the American diplomats made descriptions of Yugoslavia of those years, and they said that it was a schizophrenic country, that it was some sort of Trojan horse for the Soviet Union. And there is a description which one of the diplomats made in '57, and he said that people from Yugoslavia, when they were sincere, they admitted that they wanted the Soviet Union and the NATO to keep, they wanted both blocs to keep going on, because they were in between and they profited from both. And in the '67 there is some writings which say, Yugoslavia is in theory a communist country, but it is actually an independent country which has turned down most of the socialist experiences of other communist countries. We'll be talking, our guests will be talking much more about this. But politically they took a distance from the Soviet Union, and this takes, this gets to a specific important moment in '61, where in Belgrade there is the non-aligned movement. That is, they found their own league of countries, a third bloc, which explains itself as a non-bloc and anti-bloc. So they moved away from the duality of the Cold War, and with the non-aligned movement, with the video of Jasmina Siri, we saw actually the building which was built for this first conference of the non-aligned movement. And there we saw precisely that abstraction and abstract art had quite a lot of importance. Another initiative we'll be seeing, besides the pedagogical exhibition, was all the exhibitions which were organized in the Koroška Gallery in Slovenia. In this case, it's the foundation of another museum, a small museum in another city, and the story of the painter who founded Beko. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing well the Yugoslavian names. I really apologize for that. Peško, sorry about that. Unfortunately, he died 2 weeks ago, the 2nd of May. In '57, he finished his degree in fine arts in Ljubljana, and his masters encouraged him to continue his training in Paris. So there was a connection not only with constructivism but with informalism, and he was told, hey, why don't you go to Paris like other painters? And he was between abstraction and figurative painting, and he said no, with a heroic gesture, or that could be at least the legend behind it. He said, no, I'll go to Slovensgraden to found a museum with a cosmopolitan aim, because I want to follow the model of the Documenta from Casa. So it's a city which is far away, it's close to the border, and there he founded a museum which used this non-aligned movement, when at the beginning of the '60s, thanks to the UNESCO, he starts promoting open calls for artists. That is, the UNESCO, together with the Koroška Gallery, they start promoting some international open calls for artists, which of course didn't get to become the Documenta, but they aspired to reach the whole world, and they wanted to encompass artists from the whole world. And these open calls had utopian themes, and there was a humanism which was very associated to UNESCO. We'll talk more about this with Barbara Steiner and Andrea, but for instance, with exhibitions such as Peace and Friendship, or Peace, or For a Better World, somehow the slogans were very much aimed at promoting the collection which the Koroška Gallery does have right now, which is formed somehow by an utopian art, a post-war utopian art. This also takes us to the work which the Koroška Gallery is doing right now. The third definition, the third resonance we're looking for in abstract socialism has to do with the memory processes. This is another aspect we are interested in here. That is, the memory processes, or how to remember this history, how to recover this history. It's not only about positivistic historian approaches, it's not only about collecting data, it's about updating processes which imply reflexivity, which probably is also associated to this abstract art. These memory processes. These memory processes are learning from some self-reflexive gestures, which could also be related to abstract art. That is, which abstractions of socialism are useful nowadays, which socialist abstractions could we associate with modern problems. I believe this is one of the aspects that for artists and researchers are, one of the questions which are, in question here. It's not only about naturalistic memory processes. We don't want to develop a real, true, or even a nostalgic history. One of the terms which is usually applied to the memorials of Yugoslavia, I even found the term of Yugo nostalgia, which could have to do with the commodification of memory, which precisely some of the collectives which are here, well, in your presentations, I guess that you could be positioning yourselves against them. This is a reflexive memory which questions the conditions in which we produce memory, and we would also wonder, what's the point of developing this memory or for recovering this memory nowadays. We don't only think about, what we can remember, but also what we can't remember, and what can we learn from what has been forgotten somehow. So somehow the question last year with the videos of Jasmine Seri to the focus group, we saw that the memory processes, the relationship they establish with all these utopia from the 50s is indeed critical. There is a critical distance, but there is also a pragmatic attitude. There is a pragmatic approach with this question, of to what extent these memory processes are useful for extending the possibilities of our present. I believe that this is it for the presentation, and I would like it if we could start with the seminar. Once again, thanks to everybody for coming.